This is a re-upload of my first video originally posted on September 5th, with readjusted audio levels which will hopefully have a better balance between voice and music, plus some additional lines that I had originally cut out. Sorry in advance for the weaker presentation and the quality of the footage. I didn't have the original files anymore, so basically I couldn't really remake the video. I simply downloaded it and I still had my original recording, and so I put them together and adjusted the audio. While I may still return to this topic again someday, especially given the newer information and context that I have gotten over time while making other videos and looking further into these matters, listening and reflecting on different ideas and opinions, etc., I still want this stuff back up for posterity, and because of how important the DEI topic is overall, and most of all because it didn't have much of a chance to shine when it was originally uploaded. While I received some nice comments on it, the video actually struggled to make it past 100 views on its own, and as my channel grew, it still struggled to make it past 1000. So hopefully now, with a fresh name, tags, thumbnail, balanced audio, and of course a healthy following of over 4000 subscribers, it will fare better. If you're new and you enjoy long-form content like this, feel free to like and subscribe to not miss out on any future uploads. And without further ado, let's roll the video. Hey everybody, today I'd like to talk about DEI policies, specifically within the entertainment mediums of games, movies and TV shows, and why I believe that they are destructive to their mediums and regressive to our society. I say this as someone who understands why DEI exists. I'm not trying to be hateful, I come at this from a neutral point. I just genuinely see it as a poison to our society, together with the extremist ideologies that are often associated with it. At some point in my past, I was even kind of excited at the prospect of diversity programs being added into video games. Although back then, the actual term DEI did not exist, and as far as I'm aware, there was also no such thing as actual DEI policies in place within the entertainment media in order to manipulate it and do what DEI policies do. Nor were there any of these more recent terms that have surfaced over the last couple of years, representing different programs and groups that are all tied together with these policies and ideologies. Things such as DEI, D&I, ESG scores, diversity quotas, BlackRock, SHRM, Bridge, etc. I was just a young dude excited at the prospect of more diverse protagonists and types of games popping up in the industry. I guess I didn't really understand how far it would go, because I always had this naive vision of the world where people in charge were meant to be responsible and good.
Serious?
I thought that this would eventually lead into very cool, new, refreshing projects being made with new kinds of settings, new themes, new perspectives, stories, and all of that other good stuff. Basically, to put it as simply as I can, think about all of these awesome games that we've got in Asian settings. Games like Yakuza, Sleeping Dogs, Nioh, Ghost of Tsushima, Sekiro, etc. Back then, there were already plenty of games set in Japan, thanks to a healthy Japanese games industry. And what I hoped for is that we could see a growing number of new original games set in other interesting and unexplored locations in Africa, the Middle East, South America, India, Russia, pre-colonial North America, etc. There's a gold mine of cultural, mythological and historical ideas that could turn into great games. And basically that is it. I didn't really have any perception of politicalness towards DEI or diversity, or any desire towards it, of course. I really just wanted to play some fucking good games. As DEI policies and overly political correctness grew more and more relevant in our culture, what happened instead, for the most part, was, and this is specifically using the TV show and movie industry as an example, they just started to remake existing media in live action and casting black actors to play those characters that were previously usually white. They weren't new reimaginings of the characters using new kinds of cultural or social themes. They weren't new versions of the characters, they were pretty much exactly the same. It's just that now it was a person of color playing the character, and they would popularly take to social media to announce and revel in how important these changes were, how meaningful they were supposedly going to be for little children of color growing up, as well as for adults to see and feel represented by. Whether or not that's true, I really can't say. I can only say that that's a weird way of thinking about the way that children look at movies and etc. When I was a kid and I was watching movies, cartoons, animes, I wasn't really thinking about race or gender. As a child, you don't have anything going on in your head about whether or not you're feeling represented by the media. Hell, not even most adults think about shit like this when they are watching a piece of fiction. I used to watch loads of Dragon Ball, and I didn't care how these characters looked. Every other kid in my class watched Dragon Ball as well, and every single one of us wanted to be Goku, Vegeta, or Gohan over in the school playground, no matter the color of our skin. But anyway, then there's also the number of egregious examples of blackwashing actual historical people like Cleopatra, Hannibal Barca, and Anne Boleyn, and real mythological figures of other cultures like, for example, Achilles and Zeus. These examples never sat right with me. We were taught that whitewashing things was wrong because they misrepresented history and cultures around the world, and we should all collectively stop doing it and present media more genuinely going into a better future. But now, suddenly, it's supposed to be perfectly acceptable to blackwash anything that we want. Even more confusingly, we're supposed to be okay with blackwashing even other minorities like Egyptians and Greeks. Thankfully, in the gaming industry, this kind of thing hasn't really happened, at least not yet. But it's definitely the direction that we're headed in right now if we don't stop it soon. Remember that some gaming journalists and other woked out people have already complained often about how certain settings like Witcher, Kingdom Come Deliverance, and some others were not diverse or inclusive enough, even though those settings are clearly inspired or directly designed after historically white areas. This was yet another extremely off-putting argumentation coming from defenders of DEI policies. They believe that it is racist to depict fictional areas with a majority of white NPCs, even if that area is literally Northern or Central Europe in medieval times. They don't care about the integrity, lore, and rules of world building. They just want the game world and its characters to reflect their 21st century political ideologies, even if immersion and suspension of disbelief is sacrificed in the process. Witcher is a great example of this, because it's a world with such an important emphasis on its borders and the kingdoms and empires beyond them. It is also a world that prides itself in its grittiness and adherence to realism despite its magical elements. Details like these are important. Fleshing out your world building in detail adds a lot of value to your fictional setting. This is something that the games depicted loyally and with no racism in mind whatsoever. The majority of the characters were white because the game takes place in the Northern Realms, not because of some racist conspiracy. In fact, here's a runewrite that hailed from the lands of Afier. This clearly shows CD Projekt Red's commitment to properly present the characters the way that they are supposed to look according to the source content, which was also not racist. It was simply set in a dark fantasy version of medieval Europe, specifically the area that the author was from, as his work even includes some pieces of folklore that are unique to his country. If there was some kind of whitewashing conspiracy, CD Projekt Red would have just made the runewrite a white man. And I'm sorry, but nobody can convince me that race-swapping characters or settings that are supposed to be presented as white or as literally anything else is not as racist as the whitewashing that was going on in years past. If we're all supposed to be better and more aware and usher in a better future, then we all need to stop doing these ridiculous fucking things. We cannot have rules for some that don't apply to others. Besides, no one is forcing Hollywood, Netflix, Disney, Amazon, etc. to keep using Eurocentric settings or pieces of established media like The Witcher or Lord of the Rings, where the settings are based in white countries. If these DEI policy pushers want more diversity, why not actually start by producing shows centered in different countries' cultures, histories, and works of fiction? That way, you're not only exploring new ground in media, but you're also doing actually meaningful diversity and representation. I've reached a point where I can comfortably say that I despise DEI policies, whether or not there's an alternate universe out there where they could have been used properly by smart, well-adjusted people who care both for the concept of DEI as well as for the source material of the media that they would apply it to, and that would actually know when to stop instead of infinitely pushing it past the point of balance where it starts becoming unfair and discriminatory. I don't know. What I do know is that that's definitely not what happened here. Here, it seems DEI policies have fallen on the laps of unhinged, angry, narcissistic, race and gender-obsessed activists who care for nothing else other than how much power and force they can exercise on people and media that they don't like. The pieces of media and the fandoms that come through their desks will either bend to their forceful wills or they will break. One way or another, they are going to be satisfied and fine because they don't have to contend with accountability. In the world of entertainment where accountability actually existed, we wouldn't have people like Kathleen Kennedy ahead of massive properties like Star Wars. And in the gaming industry, for example, we wouldn't have certain higher-ups and CEOs ahead of certain publishers like Warner Bros. Games, for example, pushing live services that are certain to fail. These people are capable of dragging an entire company down with them before anyone actually displaces them, and when they do, it is often already too late to mitigate any of the damage that they did, and they don't really face any consequences for that damage. They often walk away with millions. DEI policies also touch on other things outside of race, gender, and sexuality. One thing that is particularly hitting the games industry, that is seemingly not hitting the movie and TV show industry, is the overall relevance of aesthetics, of how certain things and certain characters should look like, especially on female characters or female characters themselves. I'm working on a separate video going into more detail on this topic, so I'll be keeping it short here. An aspect of DEI is being overly apprehensive and restraining to an unhealthily obsessive degree on what may or may not represent or misrepresent certain groups, or on what may or may not offend certain people. A thing that some woked-out higher-ups in our industry have been going hard on is the whole unrealistic, harmful body and beauty standard bullshit. As a result, they are nerfing female character design. They can't be too pretty nor attractive, so we see purposefully botched 3D scans of actresses and face models, whereas on the male side, we actually see the opposite. You can go through a bunch of scanned male actors and models and you will struggle to find examples of deliberately botched character models or altered designs to make them look unappealing. In fact, on the male side of things, all you'll see is perfectly scanned actors and models. At times, we even see them made more handsome and muscular, like Sam Porter Bridges and Johnny Silverhand, just as a couple of examples off the top of my head. There's even a funny interview with Hideo Kojima where he says that Norman Reedus asked him to make him more muscular in-game, to which he complied. I don't know if this is a true story or if it's just a little anecdote, but regardless, they sure did buff up Norman Reedus' character model, and good for them. Sam carries a lot of heavy shit across the country, so it actually does make sense for him to have a more muscular body. The same goes for clothing and armors. I won't go into too much detail here, but basically if you are creating a male character, you have the freedom to do as best of a job as you can possibly do in order to make him look handsome, cool, strong in all facets, including clothing that actually shows that off. But if you're creating a female character, you have to work very cautiously with a bunch of restrictions in mind, in order to not make them too pretty or shapely, or wear things that are too revealing or too feminine, and the word attractive is straight up illegal in the vocabulary of anyone who sees them or who is working on them. Please note that this is specifically in regards to certain genres and styles of games. This is in no way a general rule for every game or genre or setting. Some settings benefit from realistic and diverse body shapes and sizes to portray more realistic people in more realistic places. But when you're in a ultra-fictional, adrenaline-filled, action-adventure, sci-fi or fantasy setting, you want to play as someone who looks the part and who carries themselves with like ultimate protagonist energy. It's not sexism, it's the same for male characters. We don't want to play as a fat balding dude in God of War, Uncharted, Assassin's Creed or other games along those lines. The difference is that this kind of thing is not targeting male characters, it's only targeting the female ones, so naturally that's where the discourse is going to be at. In the interest of saving time, I'll cut this topic right here and save it for a future video, but I really do think that this is legitimately sexist and insulting. By purposefully botching 3D scans to make characters uglier and then call them more realistic, you are essentially sending the message that, realistically, women are so ugly that you can't keep your actress or face model's face intact. You have to make them uglier in order to fit the broader female audience. Honestly, what the fuck is wrong with you? DEI policies quickly became about taking the shortest and quickest route to fill their diversity quotas and get their paychecks. In the Disney TV show side of things, it was like, hey, instead of making something new and original that gives audiences interesting content alongside with representing people respectfully and effectively, let's just take some white shit that already exists and cast people of color for it. Throw in a couple of gays and hopefully that'll shut them up. The media is going to love it because we are sticking it to the whites, and marginalized communities are going to worship us for doing it. And in the gaming side of things, it was like, hey, instead of doing actually good and diverse character design for our games and mix it in with good character design that we already know that people like, let's just make the most extreme stereotypical shit and take away all of the kinds of character designs that we know that players of this genre are known to enjoy. Also, let's put all of this at the forefront of our project and completely neglect the actual gameplay and fun factor of our game. I guess the way the industry does it isn't just disingenuous, it's also incredibly fucking stupid. And the same kind of disingenuous treatment ended up happening anyway with the LGBT+ representation as well. None of it is actually genuine, none of it is actually coming from a position of wanting to create genuinely good, well-written and memorable characters that stand the test of time and that happen to be gay or trans. If you ask sane people, they would tell you that the goal of LGBT+ diversity through DEI is to normalize otherwise marginalized groups like, for example, gay and trans people through media. What better way to do that than with actually well-written normal characters? But sadly, that's not what DEI policies are interested in. It's all just about pandering to the masses with stereotypical tokenized bullshit to publicize and score ESG points while looking good on social media. Then patting themselves on the back when media and news entertainments start churning out articles about how brave and stunning and important the latest first whatever 2S LGBTQIA+ indigenous person of color is in the newest season of franchise number 302 from the 23rd worldwide media conglomerate. At the end of the day, this is what disgusts me the most about DEI policies at the hands of these people. It's the fakeness of it all, the disingenuous nature of all of the condescending pandering and virtue signaling that these companies engage in for profit, and the general attitude of us versus them and demonization of their audiences instead of the genuine desire to bring people together. And the fact that on the business side they would throw it all out the window in a fucking second, the moment it became unprofitable. Just like they don't even bother to put pride flags and messages in their bios and profiles on pages from countries and areas of the world that maybe could actually benefit from that, like Middle East, Russia, China, etc. The rise of these ideologies that support and pretty much thrive off of the use of DEI policies, both in the media as well as the job market for example, has also led to a rise in racial, gender and sexuality tensions in recent years after it had actually been slowly progressing in a positive manner. This is because at its core, DEI policies and extreme ideologies feed off of each other. One helps the other gain relevance and legitimacy, and they are discriminatory and regressive, especially when used by narcissistic idiots drunk on power and blinded by unwarranted rage, living deep inside of echo chambers that have no semblance of reality whatsoever. I'm sure everyone has noticed by now, whether they want to admit that it's a problem or not, that it has become #cool to drag straight white people online and even in real life, especially in countries like America or Canada. It's become perfectly acceptable to talk shit about them and make generalized assumptions about them as a racial group without it actually being considered racism or hate speech. This is absolutely delusional and inhumane behavior, completely unfit to be considered progressive. And this is partly thanks to the extreme ideologies that support DEI policies and the way that they shape the world. You see, DEI doesn't see people as individuals, it sees people as the sum of their labels. Then it rates and rants those labels, and when necessary, it pits those labels against one another to find out which one of them are more privileged than the rest. Naturally, if you're white, you're immediately in last place. The only way up the ladder is if you're gay or transsexual, or if you identify as one of the hundreds of genders within the non-binary label. This really is the lens with which DEI shapes society and indoctrinates people into thinking and perceiving the world around them. You could look at a single DEI policy and see something along the lines of giving priority to marginalized groups, for example, and you may even think that that's good and okay and appropriate if the situation calls for it. But eventually, after years of pushing it further and further beyond that invisible line of what is okay and what is unfair, after more and more strict rules, manipulative tactics, and indoctrination of people, you will find yourself where the extreme left is already at now, looking at someone and immediately judging them by the color of their skin, trying to figure out what they are, what kind of shit they identify with, what type of politics they believe in, etc., if it's not already immediately noticeable by what clothes or accessories they wear, or what kind of things they have on their social media bios. Hardly even wanting to engage in conversation with them until they know what they're about, and if they're worth listening to. And no one is really safe from it either. It's not like you can even be like, oh, well, it's okay, I'm not white. This shit's still going to label you, rate you, and rank you regardless. And no matter how marginalized you think you are, there's always going to be someone who's going to believe themselves to be more marginalized than you, and therefore more deserving of more rights and considerations than yourself. Take the Cleopatra show, for example, that I mentioned earlier. Jada Pinkett Smith and a bunch of fucking idiots gathered together to make a show posing as a documentary, blackwashing history, spreading disinformation, and even defamatory claims against Egyptian and Greek people alike. On the surface, you would think that in an entertainment media run by a tribalistic ideology that loves DEI policies, it would be impossible for a minority group to be targeted in order to elevate a different group that is actually even more represented in media than Egyptians and Greeks. Yet, it happened anyway. Thankfully, the show was so incredibly terrible that the majority of people laughed at it and forgot about it, but still no accountability was taken for it whatsoever. And on the gaming side of things, we have, for example, the Japanese people getting attacked online by woked-out idiots calling them racist because of them simply wanting Western studios like Ubisoft to stay away from their history and culture if they're just going to misrepresent it in a video game while boldly calling it historically accurate. So yeah, even if all white people got on a spaceship and left, this ideology will still continue to cause problems between everyone else as they would tussle over who holds less privilege, who is more marginalized, who is a new minority, who has a more problematic past history, who has more insensitive religious or cultural views, so on and so forth. When something is inherently discriminatory towards one or more groups of people, be them groups separated by race, gender, religion, sexuality, or whatever else, then obviously there is going to be backlash. People do not like inequality, and we, especially here in the West, are supposed to be far smarter and more socially and emotionally aware than our ancestors were throughout the years, no matter where we are from. We can't hold people responsible for what long-dead people did in completely different times in history, with completely different standards for what is moral and for what was normal or approved. But what we can do in this age of better awareness, understanding and responsibility is do our best to not repeat the past. DEI policies and related ideologies are running rampant as a discriminatory tool. It is a return to a regressive ideology obsessed with race and gender, obsessed with who deserves more, who deserves less, who deserves harm, who deserves pity, who deserves wrath, who deserves forgiveness, who deserves suffering, who deserves joy, who deserves hardships, who deserves to be listened to and who should do the listening, who deserves to speak and who should have their mouth shut, etc. And all of it is based solely on the unchangeable, uncontrollable, and completely irrelevant qualities that we have inherited at birth. This is such an incredibly regressive and obviously wrong thing to support that it's mind-boggling to me that I would even have to write all of this down to explain it. I mean, Jesus, when I was a kid, this was incredibly simple. Do not judge a person by the color of their skin or their cultural background. Don't judge someone for the clothes they wear, don't judge a woman for being a woman, don't judge a man for being a man, and that we are all equal to one another and should all treat each other the way that we would like to be treated. Yet now all of these things are points of contention in social media spaces. This progressive ideology that is actually so insanely regressive actually tells us that no, we are not all the same. We are not equal. We do not all deserve to be treated the same way. Some of us deserve to be treated well and some of us deserve to be treated like shit based on race and gender obsessed values. I'm not a religious person, but every day I go to work I give thanks for the fact that real life is still so refreshingly normal. The people I interact with every day are just so normal. But at the same time it makes me sad when I think about how radicalized and crazy social media spaces are becoming, and how relaxing and fun they used to be, and how so much of these regressive harmful ideologies are crossing over into the entertainment space and real life. I really hit the name too. It's a purposefully misleading term made to immediately shut down any discourse surrounding it. After all, on its own, the words that compose the acronym are good things, so whenever someone looks up the description and is completely out of the loop with what is going on, they won't see anything wrong with it, and will assume the people against it are people who oppose the basic principles of diversity, equity, or equality and inclusion. See how flowery and lovely and warm these words are at a surface level? Now contrast them with the fact that this ideology breaks individuals down to fucking numbers based off of how much their race, gender, and sexuality are worth. And you will see that these words actually mean nothing and are just completely bastardized in practice. They also need to stop associating supporters of DEI as left-wing and everyone else as right-wing. This is something that brain-dead people love to do. Basically, everyone who disagrees with me is alt-right. You'll be right fucked to find out that I've always been a left-wing person all my life. It's only now in recent years, with the rise of regressive tribalistic ideology and weird authoritarian bullshit like overly patrolling and even manipulating language, that I have felt kind of abandoned by the left. They're pushing hard towards extremist ideals, and extremist ideals are never a good thing. So stop doing that thing that you constantly accuse the white people you hate so much of doing, and stop judging books by their covers. Perhaps if your retarded ideology bothered to teach you to see people as individuals, you would look around and realize that these extremists are malicious and are actually hurting the left and driving people away. Anyway, gotta carry on here and get back to the video game topic. DEI policies are simply not necessary. We don't actually need them. That's not to say that we don't need or want diversity of characters, equality of treatment, and inclusion of minorities. When I say that I disagree with DEI and that I don't like it, it is not by any means the same thing as me saying that I disagree with racial equality. That is absolutely absurd. It simply means that I disagree with the political and societal ideologies behind the use of DEI policies. It means I have criticisms and gripes with it as this regressive tool that unhealthily obsesses over race and gender profiling. DEI is not the literal definition or belief in race and gender equality. Stop conflating these words, they're simply not the same. What I mean when I say that we don't need DEI is that we were always able to do far better diversity in media when we weren't trying to brute force it through unhinged DEI policies that aren't even good representations of the groups they're trying to pander to, as we already established. Just looking at what happened in the gaming industry over the past few years, it has been going off the deep end. It started with very basic and realistic ideas like we need more diversity in protagonists and settings, but it has quickly ramped up to incredibly strict rules standing in the way of creative freedom and actually worthwhile storytelling. I've shown this before, but have a good look at it again. This is what Microsoft has posted for all of its game development teams to internalize and tiptoe around. Shit like literally obsessing over character designs and personalities that you have for those characters and how they may or may not offend someone or cross into any perceivable stereotype is just getting in the way of character design and writing. And shit like having literal diversity quotas to make sure that everyone looks different and every ethnic background is presented equally in the story with equivalent screen time and dialogues is insane. This is a nightmare when it comes to structuring a story and actually bringing quality to a game. You not only have to have a bunch of different characters in order to fill those quotas, but you're also supposed to give relevance to all of them. Now I understand why in Spider-Man 2, a relatively short game that I, a leisure player, platinumed in a mere 23 hours, a game where there are already way too few side missions, and of the ones that are there, several of them were just a complete what the fuck scenario, like collecting instruments to open a museum and helping college kids do their fucking homework. They also go ahead and set aside a special mission for an entire fucking section of environmental puzzles for Haley, a deaf woman of color who, outside of apparently being Miles' new girlfriend, has absolutely nothing to offer to the plot whatsoever. And I know that Spider-Man is from Sony and that this list is from Microsoft, but if you think that the same kind of shit that is on this list isn't being peddled everywhere else that has these checklists and guidelines for diversity and inclusion, then you're mistaken. Plus, remember that Spider-Man 2 was worked on by Sweet Baby Inc., who absolutely has these same lists and guidelines and even worse intentions. These policies also reach far enough to get into the actual hiring process in some companies, as well as promotions within the companies and the placements of lead writers, directors, lead character designers, etc. This is a topic that I actually hate talking about because it gets dangerously close to saying, for example, that someone only got a certain job or a certain promotion or a high lead position on a project because of their race or gender. This is not the type of shit that I roll with. I hate these kinds of topics, I hate these insinuations, This isn't at all the type of thing that I would throw around lightly. I only bring this up because it is an established part of what DEI policies stand for, hiring people based off of race and gender rather than on merit, experience, or any other kind of valuable and earned credentials. If you don't like it, then you shouldn't be mad at me or anyone else for bringing it up. You should straight up reject DEI policies, period. I'll never understand this behavior where people turn a blind eye to what is happening right in front of their face and shoot the messenger per se whenever they mention something like DEI hires, instead of turning that anger and disgust towards the actual source of the problem, which is the actual fucking DEI. What do you think would happen when you support an ideology that actively chooses to obsess over race and gender instead of just viewing people as equal individuals? Then there's also those who don't even believe that this exists and it's actually just a big conspiracy. There are loads of brands, companies, studios, etc. that heartily celebrate their DEI hiring initiatives and other similar ideological things, as it is actually profitable for them to do so, because it adds to their ESG scores. So if you're someone who gets mad at me or anyone else for reporting on something that exists, use that moment to think for yourself and identify exactly why it is that you get so angry when this matter gets brought up. Don't point it at me. I don't like this either. I hate that this questions certain people's ability and professionalism because of their race and gender. The difference is that I don't support this kind of ideology, but you apparently do. People who support DEI need to come to terms with the fact that they are supporting the idea that certain people of certain races, cultural backgrounds, genders, or sexualities are naturally less able, less skilled, less intelligent, and less professional to the point where they need the governments or companies to employ DEI programs in order to make them hireable and promotable. And if it's not the DEI policies and programs themselves that do this, then it's that ideology tied to it that is artificially giving some people more importance and opportunities than others based on race and gender discrimination rather than actual ability. This is still wrong and regressive. If you've got an opening for a game director or a showrunner for a huge important franchise, you should promote someone who's proven to know what they're doing, instead of handpicking them for ideological reasons. That's the same shit that DEI policies do, and that's precisely why a show like The Acolyte that nobody wants to watch, not even the people that it's supposedly appealing to, completely failed. But anyway, let's just get back to it again. So in conclusion here, good diversity was employed in the beginning, which helped the gaming industry grow some more. It opened the markets to new kinds of players, more female gamers, more gamers of older ages, of totally different backgrounds and even classes, who enjoy wildly different kinds of games, like very casual ones, the cozy games that are often relaxing, soothing, and very positive. People who love simulators actually began getting a bunch of professionally made simulators that look really cool. Even I play some of them sometimes now. I love to unwind to House Flipper every now and then. These are all examples of positive diversity. Diversity that helped the gaming space grow and find new grounds, rather than trying to overtake different genres to uniformalize everything. Like, imagine if the cozy genre, for example, instead of becoming its own thing with its own games, was trying to inject itself into as many mainstream games as possible. That's the kind of shit that's going on with DEI policies. It's the kind of shit that's going on with these people obsessed with them who want to fuck with the actual gaming space to make everything the way that they want it to be and screw over everyone that loved what they loved. A literal takeover, trying to undermine what actual audiences wanted and forcing us to eat shit that we did not order, often trying to label these audiences and the games that they played as outdated, problematic, backwards, bigoted, or even straight up racist, sexist, and pretty much all the phobias in the English lexicon. Over time, new games or sequels began popping up with some changes, new decisions, or designs that felt off. Sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. They were clearly there to appeal to woke culture and to try and appease angry cancel culture mobs on the internet. And for a while they were fine. The problem was when they started to ramp up to become even more restrictive, invasive, and obnoxious. And these cancel culture mobs are the same cancel culture mobs that companies like Sweet Baby Inc. would use as a threat, manipulation, or coercion of bosses at studios and publishers to get them hired as consultants to inject more and more of these changes, decisions, and designs. Woked out developers within some of these studios and publishers, as well as some actors and directors within the TV show and movie industry, would even grow bold enough to tell their audiences to suck it up, that what they want is wrong, and now it is what it is. Their medium is changing, and if they don't like it, then they don't have to buy it or watch it. Which is usually fine, and actually how things should have always been. If you don't like something, then don't watch it or don't play it. The problem is that these pieces of media keep constantly failing, and instead of admitting that what they're doing is clearly not working, clearly is not successful, they pretend like everything is fine and all the criticism is actually a massive oppressive attack from white supremacist misogynists. And of course that attitude itself is contradicting. After all, if they didn't like Star Wars, for example, then move the fuck on, instead of trying to twist and mangle it into something that fits their unhinged obsessive ideologies. These people even want to force change into the very demographics that consume their content. There's no shortage of examples of this kind of thing in the extremely woked out medium of movies and TV shows, especially within Disney. Remember when Captain Marvel got all mad that there were too many white dudes watching and reviewing comic book movies? It's also no secret that Kathleen Kennedy has been trying to force the Star Wars fandom to become female. This dumb fuck even complains about how difficult it is for women in that space, as if they have to fucking run trials or jump hoops or some shit in order to enter. My dude, it's a fucking sci-fi franchise. All you gotta do to get in is to fucking sit down and watch the damn thing. You just can't admit it to yourself that the majority of women are not as interested in this kind of shit like dudes are. No matter how many more garbage shows like The Acolyte you produce, it's just not happening. And you're just going to continue damaging your current consumer base in the process and destroying your own brand. And I believe the same exact thing is absolutely fated to happen in the games industry as a whole if we don't stop it from progressing like a fucking disease. These woked out freaks at Sweet Baby Inc. and all those other activists in those DEI policy departments live and breathe for damaging anything that white male audiences enjoy, without any regard whatsoever for the fact that millions of people of other ethnicities, and of course women as well, also enjoy these games. I understand wanting to diversify your audience. Usually, as the owner of a product, you want the product to reach as many people as possible so that you can make more money. The problem is that the way that this shit is being done is with ill intent and complete disdain for gamers as a whole. These people, these activists, they fucking hate us. They despise us. Just look at how they write about us in their articles. Look how they insult all of us just for criticizing something of theirs. Look how they label us all as vile fucking people, like racists and sexists and supremacists. And it's like, what are these executives thinking as well? How can you give so much power and control over our medium to people who hate gamers and gaming as a whole? Like, what do you expect is going to happen? Do you think that they're really going to sit down and think of ways to improve the industry and give us products that we want and are excited for in order for you to make more money? Of course not. These people are insanely narcissistic, and they believe they not only know better than us, but are inherently better and superior than everyone else. Their idea of diversity and inclusion is actively making decisions that appeal to non-gamers instead of to gamers. I mean, sure, there you go, a retardedly negative example of the word inclusion, where you push it so far that you're trying to include people who don't care about a certain genre of game or even gaming as a whole in the video games that you are making, while excluding your own fucking established fanbase. Let's look at a hypothetical example. Let's say that you take Doom. That shit slaps. Doom obviously has its established and proven demographic. It's a majority of dudes who love to slay demons in brutal bloody spectacle with sharp things, fists, and a whole arsenal of big, heavy, loud as fuck guns while heavy metal plays in the background. Now let's say that some idiot decides that it's too graphic and too gory and too loud, and they want to standardize it so that it can appeal to more people. So they're going to decrease the brutality of the combats, they're going to make the guns more boring, decrease or outright eliminate the amount of blood and gore, make the execution animations basic and not graphic at all, and put some sort of like variety of soft fucking music from currently trending artists like, I don't know, Taylor Swift. All in the guise of making the game more inclusive and conscientious of a modern and progressive audience, and also more appropriate for more ages. Do you really think the core audience of Doom is going to be happy? Do you think they're going to stick around? Do you think they're not going to get pissed off and criticize your shitty reimagined modern audience Doom game and meme the fuck out of you in the process? And do you really think that you're going to garner a whole new audience that is big and passionate enough as the original demographic that you pushed away? Of course you're not. Because if people who don't play Doom wanted to play Doom, then they would play Doom, not some pussified version of it. And even though this is just a hypothetical, it's also a very real kind of example. Just look at what happened with Soy Squad earlier this year. They completely disregarded their core audience that they had from the Batman Arkham games, and they did it with such brutality that they completely shat on Batman as a character through that incredibly cringed monologue that Harley Quinn shits out of her mouth. The live service part was a mistake in and of itself, meaning that this game was always going to struggle to capture the audience of Batman Arkham. But these horrendous changes to the characters themselves, the total disrespect shown in the handling of these heroes, was so incredibly forced, so out of place, so obviously injected with cringy wokeisms that it ended up triggering people into looking into what the fuck happened, resulting in the explosion that openly exposed what Sweet Baby Inc. is to the wider gaming audience, who is still unaware of all of this shit going on in the background. So while I use the Doom example as a hypothetical, I'm not pulling it out of my ass. It might even be more tame than what happened with Soy Squad. The truth is that this idea of representation is not representative of the majority of people in the world. It's something that is completely narcissistic and entitled, but it's instead pushed and presented as this necessary thing to give non-white people the same feeling that apparently white people have when consuming media. And of course the list goes on and on as well. Instead of white, just use straight, physically able, cisgender, etc. This idea that we need to directly represent certain groups through media as if their very lives and meanings to exist fucking depend on it, as if most video games, TV shows, movies, etc. are more than just simple fictional media meant to entertain and distract people, is fucking ridiculous. No one is saying that media can't be deeply profound, but once again this is another thing that is being extensively exaggerated to the point where you need valid representation in the fucking Scooby-Doo show.
It was a talking dog, you know what I mean?
Or to the point where we need to force changes into some of these fictional media shows and games to represent people to appear to a wider, more diverse demographic instead of actually focusing on the qualities that make a piece of media good. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I highly doubt that white people are just sitting there playing these games or watching these shows and going, yes, another white protagonist. Yes, indeed. It is so vaingloriously scrumptious to be represented in yet another piece of fictional media. Elizabeth, get your finest dress. We are hitting the town tonight. I feel like celebrating. You can't take something that works for a demographic and force it to change, nor should you have to.
What are you, fucking stupid?
We shouldn't feel entitled to a franchise or an entire medium of entertainment. We used to be able to sit down and enjoy the games, movies and shows that we liked, without any idiotic notions that the things that we did not like should change in order to cater to us. People who push for this shit like to lie, and make up generalized rules and labels that are meant to be universal truths, but they are not, such as the bullshit notion that we need to be directly represented through a person of our race and gender in a piece of media in order to feel seen, and therefore to be able to enjoy it, and how important it is to feel seen. It's all BS. I never cared if the protagonist of a show, movie, anime, cartoon or video game that I was enjoying was white or black or anything else that I was not. What matters to me is the quality of the media and nothing else. When something is good, it draws in millions of people from across all corners of the world, because the majority of people are not narcissistic weirdos who walk around constantly obsessing over race and gender identities. So no. This entitled narcissistic branch of DEI policies wanting to diversify everything so that everyone is represented is not only unnecessary and untenable, it's total bullshit fed to us by bullies who shut down all discourse surrounding the topic. If you truly are someone who is so incredibly damaged that you need to feel seen in order to enjoy a piece of media, I am sorry, but what you need is therapy, so you can work out why you're so obsessed with gender and race and so self-absorbed that you can't enjoy fictional media if it doesn't personally cater to you. This is so untenable that it's literally impossible to cater to everyone. You're always going to leave someone out, and some things that cater to some people or some cultures are going to be totally inappropriate and counterculture to others. For example, LGBT+ representation is obviously going to clash with Middle Eastern audiences, and certain Middle Eastern values and beliefs are going to be exclusive of LGBT+ communities. So now you enter that aforementioned DEI situation that will grab the label of LGBT people and the label of Muslim people and have these labels pitted against one another in discussion boards in order to figure out which one of these two is more oppressed than the other, so that retarded people can choose which one to represent in their latest piece of media. Unless they pull a pro-gamer move and shove both of them in there so that they can piss off both of them at the same time while trying to cater to everyone. I'm painting with a really broad brush here. There are so many different little things from so many different cultures, lifestyles, religions, sexualities, etc. that would directly clash. Hell, even the LGBT+ community cannot keep itself straight on who or what letters should be in the acronym and what type of people belong or not within some of those letters. The only reason why this type of representation shit isn't already clashing so heavily is because, thankfully, the majority of people around the world is not a self-absorbed narcissist obsessed with their identity, scouring Twitter for shit to get offended at. Back to the gaming. DEI policies are also clouding video game discourse and valuable criticism, which is obviously a big fucking problem because if we can't openly criticize and express ourselves in regards to the games that we play, then we're just fostering an environment for terrible products to get made. Kind of like what's been happening at Disney with their declining show and movie quality. Except while Disney can sustain a bunch of failures thanks to their trillions of dollars and their business model, the games industry can't. When a game flops, it can be incredibly damaging to the studios and publishers. We've already seen several projects getting cancelled and even studio shutdowns this year. This can be a pretty profitable industry, but it can be extremely fragile as well. I'll eventually cover this topic more extensively, but for now let's just take Anthem for example. Anthem failed because it was the furthest thing from what BioWare fans expected or wanted out of a BioWare game. Instead of an epic fantasy or sci-fi RPG with an exciting story, fleshed out companions, narrative choices and consequences, and an immersive world filled with detailed lore, it was an online looter shooter live service made to compete against Destiny. The structure of the game was terrible. Clearly BioWare didn't have the experience to provide an enticing and rewarding system to keep players hooked, that even the roadmap plans were scrapped and the game was dead. You can easily criticize Anthem and call it for what it is. Terrible. You can even be facetious and call it straight up ass. Nobody's going to burn you alive for it, and it wasn't even a big controversial matter within the gaming space or even media. I mean, sure, some people liked it and they hated the amount of hatred that it was given, and even I can admit that there was definitely some potential somewhere in its concepts and gameplay, but the discourse was not mired by toxic political bullshit. However, if Anthem happened to have a trans woman of color as a protagonist, then suddenly you criticize it and bam, you get labeled as a transphobic, bigoted piece of shit. And this is actually the part where the gaming journalists come in, Anthem is actually the most important video game ever made, a revolutionary milestone in the video game industry, a historic event even. And anyone who disagrees and is relentlessly attacking and abusing it is a Gamergate, Coomer, Incel, Conservacuck piece of So not only do terminally online mobs attack you and blindly praise the terrible game, reinforcing this delusion that the developer's poor choices and other failures during development are actually total successes that are only being hated because of racists, sexists and whatever phobes, but also you have the mainstream games media, entertainment media in general, creating false narratives around the topic and widely spreading it around to wider audiences. I'm covering a specific example of this in regards to Black Myth Wukong. It should be either uploaded already or coming out very soon. The reach that media outlets have, plus their control of language and misdirection, can be really powerful tools. If you enshroud real, valid criticism with blatant, false rhetoric, calling it intolerable things like racism, bigotry, sexism, homophobia, etc., and you do it a lot, across several outlets spamming that shit for days, you successfully change or outright eliminate the narrative surrounding the topic. And if you want an example that isn't even hypothetical at all, you can just look at Ubisoft. If you talk shit about a Ubisoft game this year, you are cooked. Meanwhile, Ubisoft has been a terrible company for years with numerous anti-consumer practices and declining game quality. But right now in 2024, if you speak negatively about Assassin's Creed Shadows, you're a racist who only wants white people in your video game since the protagonist is Yasuke, a black man. And if you spoke negatively about Star Wars Outlaws, you were a sexist because the protagonist is Kay Vess, a woman. Meanwhile, the game released and is looking so terrible, nothing we didn't already know from boring pre-release footage, that even some official game gaming outlets are struggling to defend it. This is like the any percent speedrun for shutting down any and all criticism by using politics, even though the issue is not political at all. Sometimes games just suck. Now sometimes they suck because they're boring rehashes, or they're just poorly made, or they're rushed out the door too quickly, and sometimes they suck because the people in charge placed political ideologies and DEI policies and consultants like Sweet Baby Inc. as their main focus for their game instead of anything at all of worth. And that never ends well. When you start the envisioning of your game like that, it's cooked before it even gets off the ground. This is why people don't like Sweet Baby Inc. or DEI policies in general and keep their eyes on websites like DEI Detected to better inform themselves on what they want to spend their money on. Some people like to say that Sweet Baby Inc. is like a boogeyman for gamers, and that gamers have no idea what it even is, and they just hate on it blindly because they are bigots and sheep. This couldn't be any further from the truth. We informed ourselves and we've seen several games lose quality, and we identify the reason why. We've also seen the utter shit show going on at Disney, making terrible shows after terrible shows and terrible remakes that are flopping one after the other, while fostering incredibly toxic directors, actors, community managers, and etc. And as if that wasn't enough, we've also seen the disgustingly racist shit that Kim Belair and others at Sweet Baby Inc. have said. We've seen their deleted tweets. We've seen the shit that they've said, like their admittance of threatening bosses with cancel culture mobs. So yeah, we're seeing all of this shit right in front of us. We know what Sweet Baby Inc. and DEI policies represent, what type of work they do, what kind of goals they have, what kind of people they are, and what kind of future they lead to. And we just don't want to support it. It's as simple as that. And how could anyone? Look at their language, look at their attitude, look how they tell on themselves that their goal is not to be included but instead to literally take it all over, to kick everyone else out. Look at the hate they have for everyone who is different to themselves, who just happens to be the over-fucking-whelming majority of the entire planet, by the way. Look how it's not enough to carve their own place in the industry, but to actually take over and reformat all content across all franchises and new IPs. If this is the shit that they say in public, I can't even imagine what they say behind the scenes to each other. And look at their delusiveness too. Concord just got fucking shut down, not even 2 weeks after launch. Even Battleborn lasted longer and nobody even remembers Battleborn anymore. Dustborn can't even break through fucking 100 concurrent players. And these people think that there's going to be a games industry at all, made up of content like this? You know what it is? It's that privilege of not actually having to come up with any good, interesting content. It's that fucking privilege of being handed funding from governments, companies like BlackRock, and others paying for this DEI bullshit to force our behaviors, to craft a new normal from banging this shit over our head over and over and over until we internalize it. It's that privilege of being given everything without actually having to work for it, without actually having to make something good and marketable first, something with quality, fully knowing that a lot of hard-earned money is on the line, and that if you fail, if your game sucks, then you're done, and no DEI daddy, be it the government or companies like BlackRock, is going to come and save your ass by handing you some more money. Or the privilege of not even having to worry about any of this at all, like Sweet Baby Inc., because the product isn't even theirs anyway, they're just a consultant. They come in, they do their bullshit, while getting paid a fat check after threatening them with a cancel culture mob, and then, if the game flops, fuck it, it's not their problem, they already got their money. They love to LARP as marginalized victims when in reality they're the most privileged narcissistic group in the industry right now. You're not victims, you're not marginalized, you're not minorities. You're the ones in power and control right now. You just label yourselves as victims because those underneath you, the paying customer, are sick of your bullshit. They don't want to support it anymore, and you're afraid of losing that cushy seat that you literally did nothing to earn. You don't belong in this industry. And no, not because of your race or your gender, as I'm sure that you would love to pull a victim card for. You don't belong simply because you hate gamers. You hate your customers. You don't want to do right by them. You want to push them out. How can you sustain a gaming business without its fucking player base? The very fact that you proudly state your mission for everyone to see, and the fact that you got your unhinged racist tweets leaked and are still getting contracted by publishers and studios, just goes to show how fucking privileged you are. You wear your anti-consumer message on your sleeve. You're not even hesitant or apologetic in your admittance to manipulate, coerce, and threaten your way into big AAA projects. and you have a trail of flops and notable drops of quality in the resume of games that you consulted for, and you are still in business. So please explain it to me how it is that you and others like yourselves are the poor little marginalized minority victims in this industry. Plus, gaming has always been a source of entertainment, a medium within which to escape real life and have a little bit of fun, even if it's just for a few hours, before heading back to the real world. And it has always managed to work and evolve naturally, for years. Problems that it had, like for example the sexualization of women and relegation of female characters to simple damsels in distress or love interests, were eventually solved as the industry grew, matured, and diversified. It's not that it's always been perfect, it's that it has been progressively becoming better and more inclusive over decades without any such needs of regressive and destructive programs like DEI. If it hadn't been, then the industry would not have grown over the past 2 decades into the powerhouse that it is now, featuring all sorts of different genres and styles of game. It is only now that some people come along and start setting up tents in this space that they don't even want to be a part of, getting their clutches into positions of power and starting to enforce things that nobody wants, while labeling us as subhuman trash for voicing our concerns. This is where the huge politicalization of everything comes from. It comes from giving these people way too much power, relevance, and control. We really need to stop this before it goes too far, because as I said before, the games industry genuinely cannot afford these flops that will inevitably come if we keep elevating these people into this protected status of immunity against fan criticism and actual accountability for their financial failures. Just notice all the dramas this year alone. I like to think back to Angry Joe. He used to do these top 10 controversy videos at the end of each year, together with all the other top 10s that he usually does. Sometimes I think he wouldn't even have like 10 of them to be able to pick and choose from, but nowadays he'd be able to do a fucking top 50. These are all examples of these people trying to shape the landscape of the gaming space in the most malicious and intrusive way possible, using lies and misinformation to manipulate the message and the narrative, trying to hide the mistakes, lies, and failures of the companies that push this kind of shit, trying to also hide the stuff that actual paying customers want, while also trying to pass some of these terrible products as good through reviews and articles, and of course by also trying to deem any criticisms of those products as inconsequential bigotry. This is blatant manipulation of the actual reality. And none of it works. None of this politicized bullshit injected into our media actually works. None of it sells. None of it brings people together or presents any good profound ideas. None of it is fucking relatable or representative of the actual majority of people in the world who enjoy these shows, movies, or games. You can go anywhere in the world. The average person in a poor country out in the boonies will still have more in common with a random fucking white guy who lives in Ohio with a basic wage job who likes to go home after a hard day's work and play video games or watch Star Wars than any of these fucking rainbow-haired people obsessed with races and genders and quotas and representations and trigger warnings and even privileges without realizing the irony of how privileged their lives actually are when this is the shit that they spend their days thinking about. And by the way, someone please tell these dumb fucking companies that it's pointless to try and relabel the DEI acronym. Like, I'm sorry, but are you fucking stupid? Do you seriously think that you can just call it something else and all of a sudden all the fucking gorilla-brained gamers are just going to calm down? Like a fucking Star Wars Outlaws NPC after you walk into a patch of tall grass? Huh? No more DEI? Well, I'm going to buy the game now! Like, no, dipshit. You could literally go full stealth chat and remove the label completely. This is still easily identifiable just by the contents of the game or the piece of media itself. It just goes to show you how intrusive and unnatural DEI policies have become in media. They stick out like a sore thumb covered in shit. You can even just tell by listening to how characters talk, or the things that they say, or even just how they look, or by observing a game's world. If it's there, several bells are going to start dinging. It'll expose itself for what it is, an injection of inappropriate, immersion-breaking, real-life political ideology and/or propaganda. Companies like Sweet Baby Inc. don't even try to hide it amidst in-universe themes and topics. They just brute force it out into the open where it can be the most visible and noticeable, because they don't actually care about meaningful diversity or representation that is inclusive for everyone. They only care about pushing their oppressive ideology as aggressively as possible in order to get rid of the people that they don't like in the demographics of the games that they latch themselves onto. Whether or not they realize that by doing that they are dooming the industry to release failure after failure, I don't know. All I know is that it doesn't fucking work. And it's so unnecessary too. The gaming space is already so massive and inclusive that we could all literally coexist as we did for years, enjoying our little things in our little corners of this space, and oftentimes even crossing over into other communities and joining them. I've experienced this myself several times. I've made lifelong friends in the Minecraft community, the Counter-Strike community, the Life is Strange community. They're creating problems that don't actually exist and trying to sell us a solution that will never even end. We need to wake the hell up and vote with our wallets before the industry crashes. We also need to stop being afraid of speaking out because of being labeled as bullshit that doesn't even matter anymore. Reject DEI-filled trash and support good games instead. This isn't to say that there can't be good titles who happen to have DEI consultants attached to them. I mean, it's rare, but it can happen. Also, some studios already got on this shitty road before all of this blew up this year. For some, it is too late to turn back now, and they've got ongoing contracts and games that are already in development. So let's not be as dumb and close-minded as these controlling narcissists are, who label everyone who doesn't agree with them as racists and sexists and whatnot. Let's not completely demonize everything, take it case by case. If it sucks massive dong like Dustborn, then it is what it is, but at least give them the benefit of the doubt first. Besides, this industry has already proven extensively that diversity has always existed and been successful so long as the games are good. Just like games with white male protagonists that suck end up failing. They're not given any special treatment. Again, what matters is the content, not the race, not the gender identity, and certainly not the ideology. Just the content. Anyway, sorry that this has gone on for so long. I just wanted to cover this point as best as I could because in future videos that I tackle other matters, I didn't want to be focusing so much on DEI, so this is just kind of the DEI video. So yeah, thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you liked it, and if you have any feedback on what I could improve or any thoughts on the topic itself, please feel free to comment. I appreciate all feedback and I welcome all discussions of these ideas. See ya on the next one.